Hello everyone, Luke here, and we've got a very special tutorial for you on an amazing aircraft, the IceTech T700, and we're going to walk you through the tutorial manual here for the flight management system and the autopilot. We're going to tell you how to plan a flight, do the pre-flight setup, start and taxi, takeoff and climb, cruise, approach and landing, taxi to the gate, and shutdown, and the default gesture reference. And as you'll find out as we work through this, that's a pretty important feature to be able to use here on this aircraft. So we're going to give you as much information as we can here, and I'm not going to talk a lot about why we made the video here, and we're just going to go ahead and jump in here with the tutorial. So the first thing that we want to do is plan the flight. So in this tutorial, we're going to make an instrument flight from Angels N2 at Wyrldmaker region to Second Norway and highlight the basic aspects of the T700 FMS and Autopilot. The first thing we need to do is open up the SheerGood radar page and find our departure and destination airports on the map. Make sure you pick the ICAO codes for the departure and destination airports, the runway name, and the elevation at the destination airport. Our departure is Angels N2, SheerGood, ICAO code SLNT, runway 09, elevation 71 meters. And our arrival is Second Norway, SheerGood ICAO code SLSN, runway 09R, and the elevation is 31 meters. Now let's pick our waypoints. Our first waypoint is Askell. The next waypoint is Guli. And the next waypoint is Dieter Isle. It's not marked on the SheerGood map, so we pick the code by clicking on Dieter Isle, and that code is X6P5. Our next waypoint is Arizo. And our next waypoint is Blake C. Schwab, and again, it's not marked on the map, but we find out the code is XL9Y. Our next waypoint is Carib, and then Aegean, and then Snugs, and then our arrival airport is SLSN. In the next chapter, we'll show you how to set up the pre-flight, turn on the aircraft and the GPS, and enter the flight plan and get ready for takeoff. Now that we've decided on a route, it's time to program our flight plan into the FMS. We strongly recommend that you activate the gestures provided and take a few moments to familiarize yourself with the trigger keys for each one. And we're going to have a special chapter just on the gestures here later in the video. But for now, let's focus on turning on the aircraft, getting our flight plan entered, and preparing for takeoff. Okay, first we need to turn on the battery, cockpit lights, and navigation lights. We do that by typing in local chat BAT, CL, and NAV. Next, we type in GPU for ground power unit into local chat to turn on the external power. We have to click on the unit to turn it on. We want to do that so the battery doesn't die before we get the engine started. Then we turn on the GPS and the FMS by typing GPS. And now we input the flight plan by typing plan and then entering our waypoints. And you can do that all as one operation. Just copy and paste those waypoints into your local chat. Hit enter. Check that all the waypoints appear correctly in the blue FMS screen. Type P1 and P2 to display all the pages of the flight plan, and return to the first page by typing P1 when ready. Now I'm going to show you how to set the cruise altitude, the climb rate, and the heading, and we're going to do that in text chat, but it'll be much easier once you learn how to do this if you set up the gestures, and we'll have a chapter a little later in this tutorial to show you how to set up your gestures and exactly how they work. But for now, let's go ahead and just use text chat, and we're going to set the cruise altitude to 200 and the autopilot glare shield, and we're going to do that by typing ALT 200. And then we're going to set the initial climb rate to 900 FPMS, and we're going to do that by typing VS 900. And also note on the panel that the numbers do actually change. Then we're going to set the initial heading to the departure runway heading 090, and we do that by typing HDG 090. Now we'll cross-check that the magenta heading bug also marks an eastern heading on the HSI. Now we set the brake, turn on the strobe, check our fuel level, and we're ready to start the engine. Okay, now we're preparing for takeoff. Make sure the brakes are set by typing BR. Type in strobe to turn on the strobe lights. Start up the engine by typing S. Once the engine is to full speed, it will come back with the message engine RPMs normal. Natalya reports ITT stable, no warning lights. She picks up the GPU by typing GPU, zooms out the GPS map by typing GPS Z4, release the brakes and prepare for taxi. Oh yes, and if you're riding as a passenger, you have to click on the GPS map to bring it up here, as I discovered, because it does play in media player on your viewer, so just so you know. Yes, the plane flight management system, the FMS, is a completely separate system from the Sheargood GPS system that's in the plane. You can use both to set up waypoints, but for this tutorial we're just using the FMS autopilot system here in the T700. So now we're pushing back. And Natalya recommends when you're moving in a straight line, taxiing in a straight line, that you taxi at 10%, and when you come to a turn, reduce your throttle to 5%. Extend the flaps by typing F. Type LL to turn on the landing lights. Now we arm the altitude, vertical speed, and heading modes of the autopilot. You can use the default gestures, or you can type ALT, VS, and HDG. Verify that the altitude, vertical speed, and heading modes are activated by looking at the mode lights, and they should turn green in the glare shield. Now check that the runway is clear in both directions and line up at 5% power with the nose gear touching the runway center line. Cross-check that the heading in the HSI is aligned with the letter E, and that'll be marked with a magenta marker. We are now lined up, configured, and ready for takeoff. Push the throttle all the way up to 100% to start the takeoff roll. Monitor the airspeed. As soon as it exceeds 25 knots, gently lift the nose gradually to 5 and then 10 degrees above the horizon. You can use the artificial horizon if needed. Monitor the vertical speed indicator. As soon as a positive rate of climb is established, raise the landing gear by typing G. Gradually throttle down to 80%, then 70% while making sure the airspeed stays above 30 knots. Activate the autopilot using the default gesture or type AP. Check that the airspeed is above 35 knots and retract the flaps. Maintain 65 to 70% power during the climb. Activate the LNAV mode so the autopilot can follow the FMS waypoints. Again, you can use the gestures or type LNAV in local chat. When the aircraft reaches preset altitude of 200 meters, the altitude warning horn will momentarily buzz and the aircraft will stabilize at the cruise altitude. Throttle down to 60% for the cruise. Type in LL to turn off the landing lights. Now notice that we didn't turn on the autopilot until after we had taken off. And you need to remember this, that the plane cannot auto take off or auto land. So you have to turn on the AP after you have left the runway and turn it off when you start your approach for landing. Natalya reports that some people are turning on the AP when they're on the ground and wondering why the plane is trying to roll, or keeping it on during landing and wondering why the plane doesn't land and they crash. So just remember, the autopilot is only activated after takeoff and then deactivated before landing. This is the end of Chapter 3. In Chapter 4, we will be covering cruising and then approach and landing. So, following our tutorial flight plan, the aircraft should be cruising at an altitude of 200 meters at around 60% throttle and following the programmed waypoints via the autopilot and the LNAV system. At this stage, you can simply let the aircraft fly the route. However, you should always monitor the flight and be ready to intervene in case the aircraft tries to fly into a sim corner or for some other reason. The AP light and the 3 mode lights, LNAV, VS, and ALT, should remain green. Throttle should be between 55 and 70% during the cruise, ideally 60%. If you need to make heading corrections by switching to heading track mode, and on this one you probably should be using the default gesture, and that's the 7 key, and you can manually change the preset heading using the gesture, and it's the greater than or less than keys on your keyboard. And then once you get it set, switch back to the LNAV using the default gesture or typing LNAV in local chat. If at any moment you need to recover manual control of the aircraft, turn the AP off by typing AP or using the default gesture. In this route, the aircraft will eventually enter Blake Sea Gulf and overfly waypoint Carib and continue along the channel leading to Second Norway. After passing waypoint Carib, it's time to start preparing for a descent and approach into Norway. The next active waypoint in the FMS screen should be a Gin, and this will be the top of our descent point. We have already programmed our approach into the FMS. We'll be landing on runway 09R, so the autopilot will automatically switch into ILS mode after reaching the last GPS fix, which is at Snugs, before the destination airport. All we need to do is bring the aircraft to the correct approach altitude and configure it for landing before it reaches Snugs. Set the approach altitude at 100 meters above the runway elevation. Set an altitude of 130. Type ALT 130 or use the gesture keys. A couple of sims before waypoint again, start the descent by setting a vertical speed of minus 500 FPMS. You can type VS minus 500 or use the gesture keys. Throttle down to 50%. Turn on the landing lights, typing LL. As the aircraft stabilizes at 130 meters of altitude, extend the flaps by typing F. When the aircraft reaches Snugs, check that the HIS switches into ILS mode. That's the yellow course deviation indicator, and begins alignment. Lower the gear by typing G. Disarm the altitude select mode by using the default gesture or typing ALT. This will allow the aircraft to capture the glide slope for runway 09R. Cross-check that the AP, LNAV, and VS mode lights are green in the autopilot glare shield panel. Monitor the light blue glide slope diamond in the HIS. As you get closer to the runway, it will start moving downwards. As soon as the glide slope diamond reaches the center of the HIS, power down to 40%, and the aircraft will capture the glide slope and commence the final approach. Cross-check that the green LNAV mode light has now been replaced by a green APPR light. The aircraft should now be configured and establish a stabilized approach to runway 09R. Monitor the final approach and listen to the altitude callouts. The aircraft has no auto land feature, so the autopilot must be deactivated for a manual landing. When the minimums callout is given, and provided you have the runway in sight, deactivate the autopilot using the default gesture or typing AP. Wait for the altitude callouts, 50, 40, then the 30 callout. Start your flare. Pull and hold the nose at 5 degrees above the horizon. Use the artificial horizon if needed. The aircraft will touch down on its own with the main gear first. After touchdown, gently bring the nose down so the gear touches down as well, and throttle down to reverse thrust if you need to slow down quickly, or at 10% to continue taxiing. Continue taxiing to vacate the runway. After vacating the runway, you will taxi to the gate of your choice for shutdown. Upon vacating the runway, retract the flaps by typing F, turn off the landing lights, LL, clear the FMS, ILS off, turn off the GPS by typing GPS. After reaching the gate or the parking stand of your choice, set brakes by typing BR, shut down the engine by typing S. After engine shutdown, turn off exterior lights, strobe, and nav. Turn off cockpit lights by typing CL. Turn off the battery master switch by typing BAT. Congratulations, you have successfully completed this tutorial. We thank you so much for watching and for using the T700. It's an amazing aircraft, and we do thank Natalya for creating such a wonderful thing for us to play with and with so much realism. So, happy flying.